Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. It seems to me that there's a lot of interest these days in firearms history. So much so that as an aspiring inventor or at least hobbyist, I sometimes get asked if I have additional documentation beyond what I've already presented in the videos that I post here, on my various projects, and whether I'd be willing to share or to publish that information. And the answer in general is yes. I do often have machining sketches that I prepared, or testing notes, or other documentation that's not readily presentable in video form. And eventually, I hope to publish all of that in a historical reference volume that sort of covers the progression of my projects. However, when it comes to gun building projects, I feel like I'm really just getting started. And so it could be quite a while before I'm in a position to publish that as a comprehensive volume. Well, lately, I've been thinking that it might be worthwhile to go ahead and publish the documentation on certain individual projects ahead of time. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, number one, it makes the information available sooner to anyone who's interested, but perhaps more importantly, from a long-term perspective, if you've ever published a book before, you know that sometimes writing the book is the easy part. Editing it is sort of the real work. And so when I do get to the point of publishing a comprehensive history of my gun building projects, it'd be a lot easier if I had most of the chapters already edited and ready to be concatenated, rather than having to put everything together at once and have kind of a monumental editing task on my hands. And so today I am pleased to announce the publication of my first such mini reference, as it were. This one covers the Utah, or Universal Testing Apparatus Handgun that I built. This has got my original machining sketches. It's got, of course, notes on testing. I mean, the Utah was mostly for testing different barrel designs, so, this goes through and talks about all the different barrel designs that I tested, and really provides a historical reference on that one specific project. As an aside, it seems like there's a lot of people in the mainstream media nowadays who are very hateful towards the firearms community. They want to portray us as all being a bunch of criminals, and they want to pass legislation that would make us into criminals. So I think it's worth pointing out that in my gun building projects, I'm always very careful to stay abreast of what the firearms laws actually are, and to ensure that I'm in full compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. However, that said, the legal dimension of gun building is largely beyond the scope of this historical reference. This is intended to focus more on the project itself, not so much on the socio-legal environment in which it may have taken place. As well as, because gun laws do have the potential to change over time, I think that would be less relevant to include in a historical reference. Now, in the case of the Utah pistol specifically, there's only a couple of legal issues that might be worth discussing here, just to head off the trolls at the pass, so to speak. And the first one is this rumor you may have heard floating around the internet that publishing technical data about firearms is illegal. Well, where this idea comes from is out of the U.S. export laws, where it does state that publishing information, or I should say technical information pertaining to items on the United States munitions list is subject to export controls. Now, this is invalid for a couple of reasons. The first being that all law is subject to interpretation by a reasonable person, and the intent of those export controls was never to regulate information about civilian firearms. It was intended to prevent information about military weapon systems from falling into the hands of or being readily accessible to foreign military interests. And so, even when civilian firearms were on the United States munitions list, there was a tremendous amount of technical information that was published in gunsmithing manuals and other reference, books, and that was never censored or prosecuted because that was not the intent of the law. However, the Trump administration recently updated the United States munitions list and pretty much removed all civilian firearms from the list. So now, even under the most hyper-literal reading of the letter of the law, publishing technical information about civilian legal firearms in general is perfectly legal. Now, the other possible technicality that I could see trolls raising if they read my book would be in discussing the 50 Action Express barrel that I made for the Utah. I stated that I'd used 7/8 outer by 3/16 wall thickness DOM tubing to make the barrel. The significance there being that if you subtract twice the wall thickness from the outer diameter, you get 1/2 inch. And according to the NFA, firearms with a bore larger than 1/2 inch are regulated as destructive devices, basically as artillery. Now, that could put you in kind of a gray area if your initial bore is right at 1/2 inch. However, it turns out that manufacturers of DOM tubing generally round to 3 decimal places when they are designing their tooling for producing their tubing. So 3/16 of an inch actually gets rounded to 0.188 inches. If you subtract twice 0.188 from 0.875, you end up with 0.499 inches. So the actual initial bore diameter prior to rifling of a tube in this case would be 0.499 inches rather than an even 0.5, and that puts us comfortably below the threshold. Then when you go to rifle it, the button rifling process that I use actually is going to force up a little bit of a ridge of material that's going to dig into the projectile. And so that's going to increase the margin of safety there relative to the legal limit. But just by way of demonstration, here is the original 50 Action Express barrel for the Utah. Here is a carbide cylinder that is exactly 1/2 inch in diameter, and it doesn't fit in the barrel because the bore is slightly less than 1/2 inch, and that creates an interference there. So hopefully by discussing these things up front, I can head off any legalistic trolling comments before they get started. Anyway, this is now available on Amazon, and until next time, thank you for watching The Idahoan Show.